The whole question of Kenan Rifai, which is the topic for this seminar, is interesting because the knowledge of tasawwuf outside Turkey, and I would say even outside the Muslim world, really focuses on people from earlier times. So that the great Sufis are thought to be people like Junaid and Bastami and Halaj. And then they're thought to be, you know, some of the great masters like Ghazali, both Imam Muhammad Ghazali and his younger brother Ahmed Ghazali. And then, of course, there's Rumi, and there's the two Suhrawardi, Shihabuddin Suhrawardi, and there's also several people who are related to the tariqas like Abdul Qadir Jilani, and of course there's later Abu Bakr Naqshbandi, and so there's of course the Khalidi Naqshbandi, which goes back to the 18th century in Turkey, Ottoman Turkey. So many people identify various periods and places with Sufism, but not 19th century, and not Turkey, and not Kenan Rifai. I mean, more people in the West, meaning Europe, United States, and America, know about the Rifai order than know about Kenan Rifai as a master in that order specific to Turkey. So for instance, one of the things that is most important about him in the history of Sufism is that he did not become a Sufi master in Turkey, but in Medina. I mean, Medina was then part of the Ottoman Empire, so he was technically part of his own homeland when he went to Medina, but it was actually in Hijaz, in Arabia, rather than in Anatolia or Istanbul, that he became a Sufi master. And so I think that part about a 19th, 20th century Turkish master, the only person with whom I think he compares, and it has not been said here in the conference, but a person who is somewhat like him is a man from India named Haji Imdadullah. And Haji Imdadullah was compelled to go to Mecca. In fact, it's really curious. I think he was in Mecca almost the same time as Kenan Rifai, because the British didn't like him. He was too active a religious leader, and he had too many people following him. So the British exiled Haji Imdadullah to Mecca and also Medina, Mecca Mukarramah and Medina Munawwara, and he was there until 1899. And when did Kenan Rifai go? Wasn't it also around that time? 1899, 1900?
1900, beginning of 20th century, I think.
Yeah, just the beginning of the 20th century. So they almost overlapped. But at that time, when the Hijaz and the Haramain, Medina and Mecca, were still under Ottoman rule, it was fascinating because there was a lot of change going on, but the Sufi orders were still central to the whole Muslim world 100 years ago. So what's crucial about Kenan Rifai is he provides a link to the orders. I would think that the most major proponent of Ibn al-Arabi is Abdul Qadir Jazairi. And Abdul Qadir Jazairi is from Algeria. And he also is facing great difficulty in maintaining himself as a Sufi master. But Abdul Qadir Jazairi is finally imprisoned and he dies in exile. Whereas Kenan Rifai becomes a Sufi master in Medina and then returns to Turkey and continues to have an influence for half a century, from 1900 or 1905 to 1950. So this is a really interesting moment when you have a major Sufi master who is under the monarchy or the Ottoman Sultanate, experiences the constitutional revolt, and then the Republican aftermath, and doesn't live to the time when there's a relaxation of the ban on Sufi orders. So he is sort of what I would call a transitional figure. So his importance is obviously very great in Turkey, but you asked me about the history of Sufism, is that he provides a link to the 20th century that is pre-colonial, that is to say it's before the European powers, France, Britain, Italy, Germany, Holland, before they become really established as occupiers of all these different countries, and also before the Saudi Arabia is taken over by the Wahhabis, which happens after World War I. So he is, in a sense, a man who spans 3 worlds, not 2 worlds, but the Ottoman Empire, the early constitutional period, the Republican period. And I think what's most distinctive about his teaching that is remarkable, Umid Safi talked about this, is the extraordinary emphasis that he has on reflecting in oneself the goodness of humanity, that there's no such thing as a bad moment that doesn't also have a divine or spiritual significance for someone who can see it. So the fact that he's not a pessimist, he's not an optimist, he's a realist grounded in a hopeful Sufi worldview. And he sees women, the second thing, that he sees women as well as men central to the way in which Sufi orders. So I think you would be hard pressed. In fact, I cannot think of, Mariamiyya maybe is the only other order in the West where you have women coming up as strong as they come up in the Kenan Rifai tradition. And so I think it's very important historically what the Kenan Rifai order represents. I think it's also important socially because it puts women in the forefront. And then because also what he did was to say, I'm not going to simply develop a new dargah, I'm not going to have an expanded khanqa. What I want is for Sufism to be part of the modern world in the university. So an extraordinary emphasis on education. It's the only point where I would say and somebody made this comparison today between him and Bediüzzaman Said Nursi. And I thought actually that was a fascinating issue because he and Bediüzzaman Said Nursi overlap, but Nursi is very angry, very mad at modernization. He wants to oppose it. And in Risale-i-Nur, it's a brilliant piece of work, and I've read it and studied it and thought about it. But it is a protest, whereas Kenan Rifai says, this is God's world. There's no such thing as it being imperfect. It's like Merkez Effendi says, it's the only world we have, and we should be lucky to be alive. So he picks up the tradition of Merkez Effendi and says, this is the world that God gave, the world that we have, and we must train ourselves to be full human beings within it. And so I think that he fulfills a role there which it's certainly distinctive in Turkey, but I even think it's distinctive in Sufism because I know a great deal about Sufi orders in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Indonesia. I've been to all these parts of the world, and I would say that all of them are still linked to the model of the dargah. That is to say that you have a saint who passes on his barakah, but also his khirka, his cloak, as well as his spiritual blessing to a disciple, and everything is organized around the dargah. So the dargah is a central point, not the university, not society at large, and not women. So I think the fact that he has this change in emphasis makes it a very different order. So the question about America. It's almost inconceivable to me. I've been teaching Islamic studies now for 40 years. I had the privilege and the pleasure of meeting Cemal Hoca back in 2002 when she came to North Carolina. But I never imagined that she was going to set up a professorship in Sufi studies at UNC. And even though I teach at Duke, which is a neighborhood and for some people a rival university, I was thrilled that she did this, that they set up this chair, that she set up this chair at UNC, because if you look across all of the institutions where there are Islamic studies in America, I think this is the only one that's established specifically for Sufi studies. There are many positions for Islamic studies. In my view, there are more than enough for legal studies, Islamic law, and there are also some that are focused on Islamic history. But I do not think in North America, I even think it's true for Canada as well as the United States, there is not another institution besides UNC, thanks to Cemal Hoca, and the Kenan Rifai professorship she established, there's no other institution where you have, in a religious studies department, a professorship devoted to Sufi studies. So I think it's made a tremendous impact institutionally for North Carolina, but also I think for the academy in America. And what has added to the influence is that this is not the first position. There was already a position for Professor Ernst. Carl Ernst was not a professor of Sufi studies, but Islamic studies with interest in tasawwuf. And like me, he spent most of his time in South Asia, in India. In fact, he and I co-authored a book called Sufi Martyrs of Love on the Chishti Brotherhood, the Chishti Tariqa. So I think what made it more powerful was there was already another senior person, and this was a junior position, but then a very strong woman, Julian Hammer, was hired as the first Kenan Rifai professorship. And she not only does extraordinary work at UNC, but she's also on many national groups where she is represented as from UNC, but also the Kenan Rifai professor at UNC. So people hear about it, in many cases, for the first time. I think if you look 10 years ago and you said, who in America, even in academic, even in very educated circles, who has ever heard of the Kenan Rifai order? I think it'd be a very small number of people. But now, thanks to this chair and Julian Hamner, but also the rest of us who've had the privilege of knowing Cemal and being here for different times, I think there's much greater influence of Sufism in general, but also Kenan Rifai. And of course, one of the other people who's been very strong supporting her and supporting this initiative is Umid Safi. And I can't say enough good things about him because while Professor Ernst does remarkable work and is really engaged in Sufi poetry, he's not engaged in Rumi per se. He's not a specialist. Professor Ernst is not a specialist in Rumi. But Umid Safi, Professor Safi, specializes in the Masnavi. In fact, he's writing, one of his next books is going to be on the Masnavi and how people understand it in different eras and different languages. So to have someone who is very strong in tasawwuf, which he is, Umid Safi, to be next door, and there is much cooperation between Duke and UNC. So even though Julian Hammer is the Kenan Rifai professor at UNC and Professor Safi is at Duke, there is a lot of synergy, a lot of coordination, a lot of good energy between the two. So in my view, the professorship has only been there for, I think, 5 years. Has it even been that long? Wasn't it about 2009?
Yes, 6 years.
So maybe 6 years. 6 years, this is the 6th year. So it takes a while for, it doesn't happen overnight, it takes a while for the influence to expand. But I think it's been a very promising start. And I will say that the strongest thing in the way is what people call Islamophobia, that's not directed to Sufism, but unfortunately the way the American media, and it's not just the media, but the American mind, it's politics, it's media, it's also in some places in education, that Islam is defined not by Kenan Rifai and not by the deep well of love and humanity that Kenan Rifai and Cemal Nurhoja represent, but instead is defined by terror activities, by a violent act, by people who claim in the name of Islam to be killing people. And these grab the headlines, so people say, oh, Islam is, and they always put something negative. Islam is. So in one sense, that's a great difficulty, but I would say, echoing the philosophy of Kenan Rifai himself, that maybe this is also the opportunity. It's not simply a challenge because there are so many people who are negative about Islam. That's what Islamophobia means. It's not just the people opposed to Islam, but people, when they think only one negative idea about a religion, and then they see this other kind of tradition that comes out of Kenan Rifai and tasawwuf, and the great work of Kenan Rifai and also of Cemal Nur Hoca, there is the opportunity to present a better and a different view of Islam. So I'm not saying that means Islamophobia is good. I wish it would decrease. I wish it would go away. But we live in a time when it's not only the national media, it's the international. It's the global network that informs how people think. So for instance, in the United States, I would say one of the major outlets for thinking about the Muslim world is not CNN, it's not CBS, NBC, it's Al Jazeera. And Al Jazeera has only been around for 20 years. It was founded in 1994, 21 years ago. But Al Jazeera focuses on really negative events in the Middle East. So again, if you get your view of Islam from Al Jazeera, it's mostly about resistance. It's mostly about small revolts and sometimes big revolutions. And often it's about things that involve crime, destruction, and even murder. So in a way, Islamophobia, and I don't say this lightly, Islamophobia is going to be with us for a long time. As an American, I've seen it grow from, I think I can almost date it. It started really with the Iranian Revolution around 1979-80. So it's really been with us for 35 years, from 1979-80 to now 2015. But something like the Kenan Rifai chair, and people like Julian Hamner, but also Carl Ernst and Umid Safi, they represent what I would call soft wisdom. And by soft wisdom, I mean it's a really deep, full, capacious, inclusive view of the world, affirming humanity and saying, this is God's world, this is the world of Allah Ta'ala, and there's not only the akhirah, there's also the dunya. There's not only the next world, there's also this world. And so if you have people who are extremely intelligent, very energetic, very well thought of, talking about and also embodying, they live a different Islam, then I think there is hope that the children of our children, maybe even some of our children, will be able to see a world where Islam is more varied and where there is more soft wisdom and not the hard violence that's linked with Islam now. So I think it was a major investment. I must say, in all my awe and respect and affection for Cemal Nur, I still can't understand how she managed to do it in China. I mean, I think I'm really grateful. I know I'm really grateful for what happened in North Carolina. But when I think that she did this in China, and I've been to China, and my wife has been to China, and I think of bureaucracy in China, I say this is itself a barakah, that she could actually make it possible for there to be an institute in Beijing, the capital of China, that actually tries to represent something about Islam, Sufism in a real light. I think Ibn Arabi must be clapping somewhere, because he said you should seek wisdom even in China, and that I know is what inspired Cemal Nur Hoca. But I must say, I teach here in Turkey at Fatih Sultan Mehmet Vakfı University, and I have had some Chinese students, and they just say it is so tough for us to be Chinese and Muslim. So to think that in this country where, I wouldn't say Islam is persecuted, it's not recognized. I mean, the Chinese approach is to say everybody belongs to a nationality. And Uyghurs, the majority Muslim group is Uyghurs, are recognized as a nationality that opposes the Hui, who are the majority Chinese. So in the face of that, this is, I think, much worse than Islamophobia. This is, if you will, the exclusion of Islam, not the hatred of it, but the exclusion of Islam. So for Cemal Nur Hoca to be able to establish an institute in Beijing that speaks to Islam as a global religion of peace and one of inclusion, even of people who are non-Muslim, even those who are communists are welcome, is an extraordinary thing to do. And I think the fact that she did it with these wonderful people, Sachiko Murata and Bill Chittick, and also Du Weiming, whom I know from Harvard, to have these people who are well respected in China and have them included in this initiative is really extraordinary. So I hope it succeeds in North Carolina. I hope it succeeds in Beijing. But I'm really glad that I get to see it in North Carolina and not in China.
Thank you very much. Can we have one last thing?
Sure.
Can you have some comments on this symposium? What do you think about this symposium, the effects of the symposium?
Well, the question is, what do I think of this symposium? We're only halfway through it, and I haven't given my paper yet. So maybe I should come back tomorrow. No. I think it was Elif who wrote me maybe 2 months ago, because this is now the end of May. Yeah, she wrote me back in March. I'm pretty sure it's back in March. Elif wrote me, and she said Cemal Nur Hoca wants to do this international conference. And I looked and I said, oh, I have to be in Istanbul the preceding week, so I'll just stay for another week. I mean, I didn't even ask my wife, which I usually do. It's very important to usually ask your spouse. But I just said, I know that Miriam would understand if I went to Turkey because Cemal Nur Hoca was having a conference. And then I saw Carl, because he's a neighbor, and I saw Umid, and I said, did you hear about this conference? And they said, oh yes, we all have to go, because this is, Kenan Rifai, it's an international symposium. But what I didn't know is that Bill Chittick and Sachiko Murata would come, or the Jim Morris, whom I know. I haven't seen some of these people, Chittick and Morris, I haven't seen for over 5 years. And I never met Stephen from Oxford, Stephen Hurtwell, who is the head of the Ibn Arabi Society. So to see these wonderful people who are international, as well as meeting some Turkish scholars, I think for me, if I had nothing more than just, of course, the great food and company, but also meeting these distinguished people here in Istanbul in May, which is a beautiful month anyway, that would be great. But about the conference itself, besides the people and besides the fact that I would go anywhere Cemal Nur Hoca asked me to go, except maybe China, but to be able to come to Istanbul is not even necessary to ask my wife. But the fact that the conference has been so easeful in this major place where we have a hotel we can walk to and walk from. You don't have to be bussed everywhere. And we've had these great clips. I mean, to me, I'm over 70 years old. I've been an academic for more than half my life. Most conferences are only words. You go and you listen to papers, you debate ideas, you learn something, you buy books, you have some time with friends, and you go home. But here, we went to Merkez Efendi. Beautiful place. I teach out near Merkez. I teach in Yenikepe Mevlahanası, but I never realized before 2 days ago that Kenan Rifai himself was buried there. Now when I go teach there, I can go pay my salams to him before or after class. So I mean, the fact that it includes visit to places in Istanbul, we've had these wonderful pictures. At first I thought, oh, this is going to be really, the word in English is hokey. It's going to be a little strange. It's going to be weird to have pictures or clips before you actually do the conference. I think actually it's an ingenious way of making it come alive. And this woman like Aziza and also Meshkura, of course I knew that Cemal Nur had a mother, but I'd never seen these images. So I thought, and again, it's just stressing the women and the strength and the importance of women. So to have a conference where it is honoring Kenan Rifai, but it's literally bringing to life the major role, the creative and essential role that women play through these women from his own life, and having pictures of their conversations. You know, all the papers have been good, but the pictures have been superb. And then the concert last night, the music concert last night, oh my God. And I think this is probably the only conference I've ever attended where I heard somebody whom I thought was a really good, I think she played a lute last night, and then she gave a paper this morning. Hatice, I don't know her last name, but Hatice from Frankfurt. I want to say she's a Turkish woman. I think she is also dedicated to Cemal Nur, and she called her a teacher. But she's first of all, or she's a musician, but also a scholar. It's the first time in my life I've ever been to a concert where I hear somebody play and speak. So I mean, you know, all these things together make it a really great conference. Great conference. And we still have a day to go. So I'm really thrilled I came. Of course, my only regret is I couldn't come with my wife, because she would have, first of all, seen Cemal Nur Hoca, which is a treat in itself. And then she would have, I think she would have been astonished by all these events, because they really have been, they've been superb. The only thing, as you know, the only thing that was a slight glitch was that the picture for the second one for Mashkura didn't come on. First we couldn't get the picture, then we couldn't get the voice. But then when she told the story, this incredible story about wanting to buy this robe for Kenan Rifai because he was her teacher, and the only way she could do it was to borrow some money from her husband, and then for him to want to have it before she had put it back, and then it comes. I mean, you know, I completely understand, and I completely accept that's what people call a miracle story, but because her intent was, what's called in Arabic niyya, I don't know what the Turkish is, niyya? Niyya, because her intention was good, the money was there. So I mean, that was the most extraordinary story that Mashkura told. Really beautiful story, and to have, you know, to realize that this is Cemal Nur's mother, and this is how she related. And the year, I thought it was so funny, the year that she did this was 1949, 1 year before he died. So it was after a lifetime of her being devoted to him, and she must have had some intuition that he was either, because he had been sick. I know he'd had a stroke and he'd been sick, but she must have had some sense that maybe he was not going to be with us much longer. And she wanted to make sure that she expressed in a visible, tangible way the love, affection, and debt she had to him. So it was a beautiful story. And I thought it was funny that it didn't come on, then it came on with no voice, and then when it came on, it was spectacular. So even the mistakes have been good. So it's a wonderful conference. I'm just waiting. I can't imagine what the sequel is going to be. The only thing is about it, I don't think there could be a sequel as good as this conference. We're going to have to wait, you know, 30 years from now when someone gives a conference on Cemal Nur Hoca, but I won't be here. I'll be waving from heaven. So thank you.